Hello everyone and welcome to episode 72 of The Sydneyist, the show that we regard, at least, as the best radio show in Sydney on Sydney. Thank you to Paul and Anthony for the great show and the great promo, and thank you as always to our amazing producer, Sophie Kennedy-White. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly and we're broadcasting from the Alan Slate studio at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM or streaming on eastsidefm.org. Tonight we're catching up with one of Sydney's really long-running and actually quite painful cultural sagas, that is the Powerhouse. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly with you on The Sydneyist, and first, before we go to our wonderful mystery guest, we will have a little bit of news as usual. Labor's TOD, that is Transport-Oriented Development rezonings, appear to be having far from the desired effect, according to the Sydney Morning Herald, which reports that one of the government's this key plan to boost housing density around train stations has netted mostly garages and house extensions, with only one single development application for what you might call mid-rise, mid-density, for an extra 16 apartments in 2024. Meanwhile, the Climate Council, headed by Professor Leslie Hughes, has lambasted the Albanese government for continuing relentlessly to approve new coal mining operations, despite the fact that we already have enough coal to last until 2050. They've called it a failure of our duty to protect our kids' future, quite rightly. And the suburb of Riverwood in Sydney's south, just south of Lakemba, has been justifiably ridiculed for opposing a 3-storey social housing block designed to house homeless older women, on the basis that such a building would force people, and I quote, to keep the blinds drawn all the time. I find it difficult to keep a straight face. What, are they frightened of seeing old women? I mean, honestly? Sorry, that's not really funny. But it's kind of scandalous, in fact. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly. We're here on The Sydneyist, and my guest this evening is the brilliant and erudite museologist, former trustee of the Powerhouse Museum, Kylie Winkworth. Kylie, welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you for being here. So, look, first let's catch up. I know there are lots of terrible things happening and not happening with the Powerhouse, but let's talk first about, just recap the story so far for people who have forgotten over the many years this has been running. It's a little sort of sliding doors kind of story, isn't it? Because the Powerhouse moved to Parramatta and is currently under construction to an enormous cost of something like $1.4 billion, which is, I think, the biggest infrastructure project since the Opera House or something. But what was left on the Ultimo site was still the Powerhouse. Only now it's been, it might be renamed and remained. So just briefly take us through that story, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, if we just focus on the Powerhouse Museum at Ultimo, we had a long battle after Mike Baird announced in 2014, November 2014, that the Powerhouse Museum would be moved to Parramatta, and the whole project would be ready by 2019, and it would be funded from the development of and sale of the museum's buildings on the Ultimo site. Well, here we are now, we're billions down the track, and Parramatta might open in 26, who knows. Bowing to public pressure and outrage, the Berejiklian-Perrottet government reversed course and in July 2020 promised the Powerhouse Museum would be staying in Ultimo, that it would continue to present science, technology, engineering and design, and that it would contrast with the future-focused Parramatta development, that they'd save money on the relocation costs and they'd keep the staff at Ultimo. Well, none of those promises have been kept.
Not a single one of them.
Not a single one of them, no. The site's at risk of being carved up despite the heritage listing. So then the following year, the Berejiklian government announced plans for a fashion and design and creative industries precinct on the museum site, which made no sense at all and, of course, was completely contrary to everything that they'd said only a year earlier.
Although it was flagged in some of those early documents, wasn't it? There was talk of a fashion museum, and everyone was very upset that it would be so trivialised, I suppose.
Yes, because the roots of this scheme go back to the 2018 business case, the fig leaf, to disguise what was the museum's demolition. Oh, we're going to have a fashion and design showcase. So for $500 million, we were going to have a fashion and design and creative industries precinct. I mean, it didn't make any sense because the heart of the Powerhouse Museum is the resonance between the converted Powerhouse buildings and the museum's internationally significant power and transport collections, for which the museum was purpose designed. All the more relevant in the evolving context of Tech Central. So why would you have the fashion and design small collections in the vast spaces of the Powerhouse Museum and evict the power and transport collections to an inaccessible storage site at Castle Hill? It was just nonsense.
But those artefacts have now mostly gone to Castle Hill.
Yes.
Haven't they? And that wonderful, I mean, I do remember the early Powerhouse when you could go and watch those great flywheels moving and the steam actually chug, chug, chug. It was pretty extraordinary. And Lionel Glendinning, the architect for that Salman Award-winning building from the bicentennial, designed, I think this is right, isn't it, a special steam boiler system to support those machines.
Yes, it was one of the really remarkable and technologically advanced aspects of the museum, the way that the steam was designed, and also the fact that it was Australia's best collection of steam engines working under live steam. Lionel Glendinning also designed in what we call the Galleria, which is part of the RAM building, the barrel vaulted building, the setting for the Bolton and Watch 1785 beam engine, perhaps the only object in Australia which is classified as irreplaceable and not able to be valued. It's so significant.
Fabulous machine.
It's the only one that is working under live steam, or was until they shut the museum, turned the steam off.
And where is that Bolton Watt engine now? Do you know?
It's still in situ, and they're working out how they can safely move it, having promised that it wouldn't be moved. But none of this makes any sense because they are also saying they're going to retain number one locomotive, and the Galleria was purpose designed to display those two internationally significant objects. So why aren't they keeping the Galleria as the setting? Lionel Glendinning's fantastic setting for the Bolton and Watt, you could see every moving part of that engine across 6 levels. It was
fantastic. And of course, those engines, if they're not moving, the wonder of them doesn't show, does it? No. It's kind of irrelevant. But when they do move, it's like, wow, this is what started the modern world, actually. So let's talk a little bit about the heritage listing on the... Because there's the RAN building, which is, as you say, the barrel vaulted building designed by Lionel Glendinning, who was government architect, or was working with a government architect. And there's also the old 19th century brick building, the Powerhouse itself. And how much, is that all heritage listed, all of that collection of buildings?
So the what they call the Ultimo Tramways or Ultimo Powerhouse site was heritage listed in 2020. But it wasn't listed. They only listed the brick shell of the former power station, which opened in 1899 and was built to power Sydney's tram network, with the trams held next door in the former tram depot called the Harwood Building. So it's always been a museum or a site that's had power and transport at the centre of its meaning. They didn't list the museum itself or any of its collections. So Labor took to 2 elections a policy to save the Powerhouse Museum. In very explicit terms, saving the RAM building, so not just the barrel vaulted Galleria, but also what we call the quadrant arc of the building that fronts Harris Street. One of the great landmarks on Harris Street. So memorable.
And that colonnade along Harris Street.
Yes. And wonderful design relationship with Seidler's later Ian Thorpe Aquatic Centre. they speak to each other.
Yes, they do.
But not for long. There's now an ugly black hoarding around the museum, and what we're looking at now is the world's most expensive museum demolition scheme, contrary to everything that Labor promised. After the Minns government was elected, Labor made a lot of commitments to transparency and to what they called a more modest heritage revitalisation of the Powerhouse Museum. They said they'd keep the Powerhouse open, they'd be protecting the RAND building and preserving the RAND legacy. And none of those promises were kept. 5 months later, the Powerhouse Museum was closed last February. And it's now clear it was closed not because the building was in poor condition, as they tried to argue, or there was a crack in the base of the chimney, which turned out to be a firing crack from 1899, which Lionel Glendenning had intentionally preserved as part of the heritage preservation. No, it wasn't a risk to the public at all. No, there's no heritage revitalisation. They've broken, unfortunately, Labor's broken every promise that they made. They said it was going to be a 250 million modest heritage revitalisation, and what we have now, which is under assessment by the Department of Planning, is the same old scheme, the same old museum demolition scheme, which completely erases all trace of the Powerhouse Museum as we know it, as a museum, a Silman Award-winning museum that opened to such acclaim and cultural impact in 1988. And this has been facilitated by what we call the hoax heritage listing, latest heritage listing in July last year, where they announced, the Powerhouse Museum complex is listed, it's saved, it means it'll never be able to be developed, redeveloped or sold. I mean, such nonsense statements, which unfortunately were uncritically relayed by a number of media outlets, including the ABC.
Yes, I remember that. The Powerhouse is saved. And I remember saying at the time, I don't think so. Read the small print.
No, yes, go to the fine print. Look at the gazetted exemptions, which were secretly developed in collaboration with the proponents and their heritage consultants. And they made sure that no part of the 1988 Powerhouse Museum is protected because the exemptions allow all of that post-1980 fabric to be removed.
So what did they mean saying that the Powerhouse Museum was protected? I mean, in what way could that be seen to be true?
Well, it's not the museum that's protected. I mean, yes, the curtilage is expanded, and nominally it includes the adjacent former tram depot, the Harwood building, but that's been excised from this development in what looks like a very ominous set of boundaries. All they are protecting is what was previously protected, the brick shell of the former power station, and with remarkably contorted logic, some claim that the roof form of the RAND building will be rebuilt because that's the only bit that's significant. But what was
kind of insulting, isn't it?
It is shocking, absolutely shocking. What's really appalling was that in the 4 years the heritage consultants worked on various iterations of their conservation plans and heritage impact statements, they never spoke to the architect and they never recognised the cultural significance of the place as a museum.
So that 1988 building, which did receive such acclaim, we expect that that's going to be demolished entirely. Is that right?
It'll be substantially demolished. It's not clear yet whether the roof frame of the Galleria will survive. They haven't worked out how to demolish it because it's not just the actual building that we see driving down Harris Street, but it's the level below and 2 levels above. So when they take out all the interiors and mezzanines and the visitor ramps that have been so successful as a way of moving visitors through the levels of the museum, there's nothing to hold it up. So it has to be demolished before they can save the RAND building, if you get what I mean.
Demolish it first, yes.
And then it's going to be rebuilt in a different form, a stumpy arc with an interior which looks like a dingy Nissan hut.
Sounds wonderful. So the cost of this demolition, I've seen a figure of 400 million, I think, which is significantly higher than the cost of the so-called heritage revitalisation. And that's just for the demolition alone.
It's for the whole project, but a lot of the demolition of the RAM building hasn't been costed because of its complications. So in the quantity surveyor's report, there are a number of exclusions. And what we'll find is that that's just the starting point, I think, because it doesn't include any museum conversion. And there's a big question mark, of course, not a question mark, but it's very clear that out of the gutted remains of the real Powerhouse Museum, there'll be just 3 large volumes, programmable volumes, as they say in the EIS.
Programmable means what exactly?
Well, what exactly? Yes. They haven't spelled that out because the only thing they've said in relation to the museum is that 3 large objects will return somewhere. That's all they've said. There's no concept, no vision, no facilities brief, no design brief, no master plan, but still they've signed off on the design excellence of this folio. They're going to clad the Rand building and Galleria, which whose form and design was inspired by the history of the museum and its evolution from the 1879 Sydney International Exhibition, and also the form of 19th century railway stations, so very light and airy.
Echoes of that glass house, that, what was it called, the Crystal
Palace and our Garden Palace that was in the Domain and the Botanic Gardens. Well, all of that conceptually escaped the notice of the heritage consultants. And so what the project will entail is reconstructing the RAM building in a different form, covering it in brick veneer. Can you believe it? I mean, here's this wonderful building that speaks so eloquently in its form and materials with Seidler's Ian Thorpe Aquatic Centre. Well, it's going to be covered in brick veneer and hidden behind a row of shops.
Which gives it no street address, but also there's a huge environmental cost, isn't there, of that demolition on that scale?
Yes.
Which you would think that we might be taking some cognizance of these days, just merely the carbon footprint of huge demolition and rebuild.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of lip service paid to sustainability. We're going to turn it into a green building. But when you look at the scale of demolition, and the wastage of high-quality, fit-for-purpose museum infrastructure.
After only 30-something years.
Well, 36 years since the Powerhouse Museum opened, but also extensive renewal works that were completed only 12 years ago. And that includes the shop and the cafe, extensive education studios underneath the entry to the RAM building, or new visitor infrastructure and amenities. All of that is wasted. And also turning the RAM building into a larger exhibition centre. Well, the RAM building's actually reduced in size. None of this makes any sense. The beautiful boardroom that sits at the top of the Galleria.
Yes, I remember that boardroom.
Not even mentioned in the Heritage Impact Statement. Perhaps the heritage consultants in their 4 years working on the project didn't get up there to notice it.
Who knows? This is a good moment for us to take a quick music break.
Broken heart. I know I'm to blame. You just cut me so deep I can't deal with the pain, and I'm not gonna crack up and cry. I won't lay down and die, cause I hurt you, I burnt you, and I made you work. Won't beat myself till I break. I made a mistake. I'm human and I'm sorry. Sooner or later Every pleasure's got some pain. And there's the price that you gotta pay.
That's a track called The Price You Pay by Lloyd Spiegel from 2023 album called Bakehouse Dozen. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly with you on the Sydneyist at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM or streaming on eastsidefm.org. And I'm speaking with Sydney museum expert Kylie Winkworth about the Powerhouse. I have trouble not saying the poor old Powerhouse. I feel sorry for the poor old Powerhouse. But Kylie, let's talk for a minute about, more generally I suppose, about why museums matter, why we should care about them, how we should think about them. I was interested to read an essay this morning, actually, excuse me, which was entitled "What Will You Save When the Climate Crisis Comes for You?" And it was about the idea of museums as treasure houses, as keeping houses, I suppose, and in the face of anticipated climate destruction, whether it's flooding or, tsunamis or whatever. But what are the things that you will save? So I suppose for the Powerhouse, it looks at the question is, how should we think about it as a receptacle for our treasured objects?
Well, I think that's a really huge and resonant question, because what is a museum but a place that shows its treasured cultural collections for the enjoyment and engagement of visitors and their education. And the promise of a museum is that it's a permanent institution, and the obligation on communities, on governments and managers and custodians and boards is that legacy of previous generations will be preserved and enhanced and passed to the next generation. So a museum is an intergenerational legacy.
That's kind of the point, isn't it, that permanence?
Exactly, it is the point, which doesn't mean that museums don't change. Of course they do. They're always innovative and innovating, and they're always looking for new ways to engage audiences and extend their reach and impact. But there are the technical definitions of what a museum is: a permanent institution in the service of society. But when we think about our experience of museums, well, they're places of wonder, discovery, exploration, joy, amazement, reverie, memorable conversations with parents and grandparents. So they're not just our society's cultural memory, but they're also part of our own personal cultural memories. And I think that's partly what's injected such longevity into the campaign to save the museum, which is now in its 10th year. Can you believe it?
Pretty astonishing.
In what other society would it be necessary to campaign for 10 years to save a great public museum, which is one of the foundation cultural institutions of New South Wales, one of the 4 foundation pillars, the others being the State Library of New South Wales, the Australian Museum and the Powerhouse Museum. Now I'm going to have a mental blank about the other
Doesn't
one.
matter.
Yes. And the Powerhouse Museum, which has been in Ultimo since 1893, and in all that time been a prominent cultural landmark on Harris Street and a place of pilgrimage and discovery for the millions of visitors that have been to the Powerhouse Museum and before that to its previous site, the old Technological Museum, which was part of Sydney Tech. So to be wasting the investment of a generation of taxpayers and donors from the 1980s so that the museum can be made into a creative industries precinct, which is not the museum's brief. It's a museum of applied arts and sciences, which is a unique brief. It's the only applied arts and sciences museum in Australia, but also one of the few in the world. It's our equivalent of the V&A and Science Museum in one. And to be ripping that up, gutting the buildings and the interiors, reducing the museum's exhibition space by 75%, 15,000 900 and something square metres of exhibition galleries gone to reduce it to 3 large volumes, which are clearly designed for performing arts, not for exhibitions.
Performing arts means it's not really a museum, doesn't it, if that's the focus? Is that right?
Well,
would you say?
Well, certainly Parramatta, the Parramatta Powerhouse has been designed along the lines where every space was designed for performance and theatre and events, and they'll put exhibitions in them in gaps between the commercial program and venue hire, which is what was in the design brief. I think it's very clear from the plans that the Department of Planning is now assessing that there's been a long-standing scheme from 2018 to convert the Powerhouse Museum to a theatre, performance and fashion and design creative industry space. And this was revived only months after the former government announced the museum was saved in 2020. They were saying one thing to the public about the museum being renewed when they started consultations, while they were writing to the Pyrmont Peninsula strategy people saying we're scoping the conversion of the museum to a 1,500-seat lyric theatre with rehearsal and production facilities. That. Yes, and
so we can't really afford to lose a museum like this, can we? And we don't. It's not like we're overflowing with museums in Sydney.
No. In fact, that's a very good point, because Sydney is in the bottom 20% of global peer cities for the number of museums. And yet we're ripping up a well-established, functional, purpose-designed museum that's only 36 years old. And it's not like the Powerhouse Museum is actually going to be in Parramatta. It's pretty clear that what will be left of the Powerhouse Museum will be buried in the big storage facility they built at Castle Hill.
So really it would have been sensible, of course, to build a big new museum for Parramatta, the Parramatta Museum, possibly, and keep the Powerhouse in the Powerhouse.
Yes, exactly.
Possibly. But you mentioned the V&A, so let's talk about one or two good examples of how things might have been done differently from overseas.
Well, it's a shame that the people running this project, Infrastructure New South Wales, a body not otherwise known for its expertise in museum design and planning, and the design committee jury, have failed to look at some effective international exemplars for museum renewal, because when you say museum renewal, you think renewal of the museum's exhibitions and fabric and its conservation of its...
And the V&A has been doing that, hasn't it? Big time.
Yes. I mean, a beautiful example is the new Young V&A, which won Museum of the Year award in 2023, I think it was.
Beautiful
and that was
thing.
Beautiful, completely reimagined, and the cost was £13 million. And at the heart of these renewal projects, exemplary projects in the UK, is the focus on exhibitions and on renewing the museum's concept and vision, reimagining what the museum can be.
But also keeping the heritage fabric and the heritage collections, which is so valuable. And the British Museum also. And
the British Museum is going through the same process. Very interesting exploration, long-term renewal plans, master plan. Haven't got a master plan at the Powerhouse, or museum, or not one they're willing to show us.
No, they're very secretive about those
Very
things.
secretive. I mean, we call it the Hermit Kingdom, such as the secrecy. Yes, the British Museum has done some really interesting thinking about how to preserve what people love about the British Museum, and really be open to new ideas for how the museum can be reimagined. So instead of the architecturally driven competition, they've had this concept of a set of workshops with leading architects, and they'll take the best ideas from
and they'll
that.
show them, I think, in the beautiful round reading room where Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital.
Yes.
Where we all do pilgrimages. So, look, just before we finish, we run out of time as ever for this fascinating conversation, but I think we need to mention the petition that is now, am I right, nearing 10,000 signatures. How can people sign that?
Change.org have a petition going. which is the second petition. I think we had 12,000 signatures on the first one.
Yep.
This petition's near over 9,000. The Save the Powerhouse Facebook page has a link to the petition. If you share our outrage about the world's most expensive museum demolition scheme, please sign the petition.
Wonderful. Kylie Winkworth, thank you so much for being here, for your passionate tirade, but also your scholarship on this subject, because it's terribly important that we understand why we need to keep museums. That's it, folks. It's a wrap, as they say. Hello, city dwellers. Ever wondered what makes Sydney tick? Well, hold on to your skyscrapers, because the Sydneyist is about to unravel the secrets of the concrete jungle like never before. Together, we'll explore this vibrant metropolis from its foundations to its penthouses. We're not just talking about bricks and mortar, we're talking the soul of Sydney. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly. Join me Thursdays at 6 p.m. for The Sydneyist.